the earliest attestation that we have for Israel in history comes from 1207 BCE, and there's a stele called the Merneptah stele, and it's Pharaoh Merneptah is doing a campaign into Canaan, and he says, "I conquered and wiped out this people group called Israel." So that's the earliest that we got. We don't really have anything until like what, the 9th century, 10th century. But several hundred years later, and so Israel is part of a cultural tapestry that goes way back, earlier than Israel's history. So, if you think about, if you picture a map of the ancient Near East, you've got the Mediterranean Sea over here, and I guess it would be for you, it'd be over here. Can't tell how this mirrors, but on one side you have the Mediterranean and Israel over here, and then on the other side you have the head of the Persian Gulf, and you have Mesopotamia here. This whole area has such a rich history, and writing appears at the end of the 4th millennium in Mesopotamia. We start getting like economic and administrative texts, and then pretty soon into the 3rd millennium, you're getting mythological texts. You're getting, it really get literature, and it really develops. And then by the time you get to the early 2nd millennium, you just have this explosion of Sumerian and Akkadian literature. And we're still 700 years before the first mention of Israel. And so, the Israelites were Canaanites, from the land of Canaan. And they developed out of the mythology, part of, you can see it in the Hebrew Bible, very, there's a lot of background, Canaanite background. And so you also have an awful lot of influence on the Hebrew Bible from Mesopotamia. So Mesopotamian literature, Akkadian literature, like the flood story is the great example. If you read through the Akkadian story of Atrahasis from the first half of the 2nd millennium BCE, and you compare that to the Epic of Gilgamesh, Tablet 11, which is from maybe 500 years later, that story, those versions of the flood story are it's what the Hebrew Bible writers, what the scribes used. And I have a chapter on that in volume 2 of the Atheist Handbook. And it's more than just the literature, right? If you read through Exodus 21, for example, in the part of the Covenant Code, you'll see striking resemblances to the laws of Hammurabi, right? So even the way they organize and think about things like case law. If you ever read through, Exodus or Deuteronomy, if such and such happens, then such and such will happen as a result. These if-then, they call this casuistic law. Well, this comes from Mesopotamia. So the reason that there's such a strong connection here, and it's so useful and so relevant to studying the Hebrew Bible, is that the Hebrew Bible, it was not handed down from on high in a vacuum, right? It's pulling from, it's utilizing, it's reworking and reshaping literary and mythological traditions and cultural traditions, and even like legal rationale that had been in the area for thousands of years. And so understanding all of that background, then coming to the Hebrew Bible, it sets it all in its context, and it sets it so you can sit down and you can read, for example, when you read through the conquest narrative of the book of Joshua, and you see these what scholars have pointed out are probably hyperbolic statements, right, about wiping absolutely everybody out. Well, if you read through Sennacherib's inscriptions about what he does, this Neo-Assyrian king, you see that he says similar stuff, right? It's a way that they speak. Now that gets abused, tremendously abused. I write about it in the second book. I have a chapter on violence and genocide in the Old Testament. But the point is that you can understand genre. You can understand where they're getting individual themes or motifs from. And that helps you understand what the text itself is doing. And I'll give one very brief example that I develop a lot in the book. If you read through Genesis 1 through 11, which is called the primeval history, there's a progression. And if you think about it, particularly starting in the Eden narrative, mankind is created very much in line with the animals, right? There's a close connection between man and the animals, right? The man is created, and then the animals are created, and they're brought before him to see who's going to be a helper, and no helper is found. But then woman is created, and the man and the woman are naked. They're unashamed. This is very much akin to what you see in the Epic of Gilgamesh with the character of Enkidu. Enkidu is this wild man who's unclothed. He's out roaming, in the steppe. The progression in the Epic of Gilgamesh, though, is toward civilization, right? Enkidu becomes, has sex with a woman for 7 days and becomes human, becomes civilized. He puts on clothing, he eats bread, he drinks beer. Then he goes to the major city of Uruk and he meets, Gilgamesh, and everything is all about moving toward the pinnacle of civilization, which is the city, right? Everything moves toward the city, and it's all positive movement toward the city. It's like, this is what we should be striving for. Well, if you understand that and then go read Genesis 1 through 11, you have movement, similar movement from innocence, nakedness, toward Genesis 11, which is the Tower of Babel story, toward the city. And notice it's Babylon, the Tower of Babylon, the city of Babylon.
Whoa.
But that movement is all negative, right? Think about the movement toward, the people following Cain and Abel, right? They get more civilized. They're building cities, but it's all bad, right? They all fall into sin. Everybody's wicked. Then Yahweh starts over with Noah and his sons. And what do they immediately say? It starts moving again towards civilization. And ultimately it coalesces, it climaxes in this city and Tower of Babel, which is the worst thing possible. And what does Yahweh do? Right? They all come together. They want to build a tower up to heaven. It's a smack in the face to this ideal that the Mesopotamians had of the city and civilization. And what does he do? He scatters them. And who does he pick? He picks Abram, pulls him from where? Out of Ur of the Chaldees, out of Mesopotamia, pulls him out with his family. And what do they do the rest of his life? They wander around. They wander around in tents, right? It's a polemic. It's a direct polemic against Mesopotamian concepts of ideal civilization. Wow. And so if you can understand that, if you can, if we can get and again, I write about this in more detail in the book, but if we can sort of wrap our heads around that, then it becomes clear this isn't a matter of plagiarism, right? It's not that the Old Testament writers, it's not that the Judean scribes are going, okay, I'm lifting this story, because they didn't have a concept of plagiarism. There's no moral component to this. There aren't like intellectual ideas that are owned by people. Rather, what they're doing is the example that I always give is they're acting like Eminem, right? If you listen to one of Eminem's albums, more recent albums, he reworks so many different artists. The song that always pops to mind is Remind Me. It's the example that I always give. But it's a reworking of Joan Jett's I Love Rock and Roll. And you can hear how he reworks it. The music itself is a replay of it, a reworking of it, and some of the ideas. It's not that he's plagiarizing, right? He's pulling it for a very specific effect. And that's how we have to think about this. We have to think about, what are they doing? Why is it that Genesis 1 sounds so goddamn similar to the Enuma Elish? right, to the ascendancy of Marduk? Why are there hints all over the place that it's like it, right? It's pulling from it. It's because it's a polemic, right? It's trying to say, we know what you guys think. Yahweh did it, not Marduk. Yahweh's better, not Marduk. And here's how we're showing that.
Okay, so you've blown my mind. You've blown my mind.